This is Ka. Lane and I will be covering the different aspects of trauma and how it impacts children in the child welfare system. When children enter the child welfare system, they are at their most vulnerable time in their lives. In addition to what landed them in the child welfare system, the removal from their home and their caregiver added additional trauma to their experience. This placed children in the child welfare at high risk for mental health problems, especially traumatic stress. Although research study shows that children in the child welfare system experience a higher rate of serious emotional disturbance, many organizations working with these children fail to gather crucial information on their traumatic experience. In addition, traumatized children are treated for their traumatic reactions, not focusing on the underlying trauma that gives rise to the problematic behavior. As mental health and child welfare workers, it is crucial that we have a good understanding of what trauma is and how it impacts a child, what evidence-based interventions are available, and what we can do to better meet the needs of these children. Before I go further, I think it is important that we have a clear understanding of the term trauma and traumatic stress. According to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, trauma refers to a disruption in the individual's expectations about the environment, resulting in a state of emotional discomfort or stress. It is the unique experience of an event or enduring condition in which individual's ability to integrate his or her own experience is overwhelmed, or individuals' experiences that subjectively are interpreted as a threat to life, body integrity, sanity, or that of a caregiver or family member. In regards to infants and children, trauma refers to an exception experience in which powerful and dangerous stimuli overwhelms the child's capacity to regulate emotions.
In an interview with Patricia Nygaard, who's a PhD, who's the Quality and Performance Manager for the Children's Mental Health Division of the Minnesota Department of Human Services, reported that when she was asked that if she had any option for child welfare social workers to know about children's mental health, the one thing that she would want them to know was trauma. She said that there's something underlining the behaviors of the children involved in the child welfare system, and it's the trauma these children have experienced. And when we in the child welfare system can understand that, we can learn to understand the assessment and understand how to help these kids. Also, if a kid is being pulled from their home because of abuse or neglect, that means that they've experienced trauma. Also, the act of pulling a kid from their home, regardless of the quality of the home, is a traumatic experience. The Landsvark article argues that between 1/2 and 3/4 of the kids entering foster care exhibit behavior and social competency problems that warrant mental health care. Specifically, these children have experienced trauma.
Trauma stress involves intense feelings of terror, horror, or helplessness, especially in response to serious injury or death, or a violation of personal physical integrity. Acute trauma, single traumatic event that is limited, and chronic trauma refers to the experience of multiple events. And complex trauma describes both exposure to chronic trauma, usually caused by adults entrusted with the child's care, and the impact of such exposure on the child.
As Ka has already addressed, there are multiple types of trauma, and different types of trauma often require different types of best practices. Also, trauma is more important than just what has happened. In an article by Koss, Bailey, and Yoon from the University of Arizona, it was remarked that pre-trauma characteristics such as personality variables, influence perceptions, and cognitive appraisals affect how one processes trauma or can process trauma. Thus, the severity of trauma depends in part on whom it happened to, not just what happened. For kids who end up in the child welfare system, often there's the issue of neglect as well as the prime factor of removal. Most kids in our system have disorganized attachment, so they've never learned how to self-regulate because there wasn't a parent to help them co-regulate. And you can't learn self-regulation without co-regulation. Also, for kids in our system, the environment in which they're developing is always affecting them, be it chaotic, violent, unsafe, unloving, etc. This keeps their amygdala in a constant state of arousal, and neurons that fire together wire together. So even though the event happened outside the child, those effects create longer-term internal damage.
Trauma has significant impact on a child's brain functioning, regulation of body physiology, emotion, development, and the child's trust in the world. When a child experiences a traumatic event, the child's system is stressed. This causes the emotional anger center of the brain, the amygdala as we know it, to activate, setting off chemical responses associated with fear and anger, including releasing the stress hormone cortisol, which acts on an emergency basis to draw energy away from the digestive and immune systems so that the body can protect itself by fighting or fleeing from perceived danger. As stress becomes chronic, cortisol destroys neurons in the center of the explicit memory, causing a breakdown of receptors, keeping the child on the alert, suspicious of large or small sensations that might signal danger. Basically, as Bruce Perry puts it, is that the brain is hijacked into an automatic unconscious reaction to a present stimulus that has some similarity to the original trauma. When this happens, the child is in a state of alarm and no longer able to engage in abstract thoughts and reacts impulsively or aggressively towards the perceived threat. The child cannot access the associative cortex to reassess the situation and realize that he is safe now. Thus, the child is experiencing a trauma moment with part of her past intruding into the present. Let's see what Krista has to say about how trauma impacts a child.
What occurs if a child's in an environment that again and again and again can't reliably shift things from danger to safety and discharge that intense energy really that comes with warding off danger, and instead is constantly being activated by responding to stress. We have a body that shifts, a body that develops differently, and a brain that develops differently. And this is what we really need to understand about the long-term impacts of trauma. That a brain that is heightened response to fight response, for instance, or hypoarousal freeze, we know that the brain's capacity to then kind of give the signal all right and shift on to being curious about other things in the environment, to be able to look relationally, to kind of affective affiliation with others and take in the curiosity and response to the world, doesn't get to happen. So more of the brain is focused on survival activity, and less of the brain is able to focus on more of the cognitive structures, comfort level with how to do give and take in relationships. You think of all of what goes on in 2 and 3 of exploring and managing strong emotions and figuring out how no is something you can stand in this world. Those things get impaired. And I like to talk with the kids that I work with that you have survivor brain. Your brain is always registering where the danger is next. And so of course you can't sit still in class. Of course you don't know that this teacher is somebody who you can just entrust to know what's best for you. Instead you have to fend off and ward off any kind of insults to you being in charge of you. And so you have trouble with playing on the playground. You have trouble with tending to homework. You have trouble with listening to your foster parent and not thinking that her asking you to do something is like a tiger in your environment threatening your very survival. So you can see how this impacts children at every level of development. There's a regression or developmental, it's an altering of the pathway. It's not like kids are frozen and no longer develop, they do. They just develop with a heightened capacity toward watching out for me and very immediate, very reactive, as opposed to being able to think long term, know how regulation works, which is I can imagine my body, I can respond to threats, I can plan ahead, I can think purposefully, I can reflect on what's going on. All those things get impaired. So it's a long journey to help kids recover.
Because the child's brain is kindled and is easily threatened and reactive, treatment interventions need to be modified in the direction of great sensitivity and more attention to the child's fear, always ready to calm trauma reactions. To date, there are several evidence-based interventions that have been found to be successful and effective in treating children living with trauma. However, because each child will have different needs based on how he or she has coped with his or her traumas, clinical judgment should be used in selecting which modifications to use. One of the most effective interventions used in treating children with trauma is the trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, or TFCBT. TFCBT is a psychotherapy approach for children, adolescents, and their parents who are experiencing significant emotional and behavior difficulties related to trauma life events. It is a component-based treatment model that incorporates trauma-sensitive interventions with cognitive, behavioral, family, and humanistic principles and techniques. Children and parents learn new skills to help them process thoughts and feelings related to traumatic life events, manage, resolve distressing thoughts, feelings, behaviors related to life events, and enhances safety, growth, parenting skills, and family communication. TFCBT has proved to be successful with children and adolescents between the ages of 3 to 18 who have significant emotional problems, such as PTSD, fear, anxiety, or depression, as mentioned earlier. TFCBT can also be used with children who have experienced both acute and complex trauma. It can be used in children residing in different settings, including parental homes, foster care, kinship care, group homes, or residential treatment programs. TFCBT is designed to be relatively short, anywhere from 12 to 16 sessions. It can be adapted for diverse and special populations. And currently, it has already been evaluated with Caucasian, African American, Latino, and the hearing impaired population. And it is currently being adapted for Native American children and children in other countries. Research studies reveal that TFCBT has proven to be effective in addressing PTSD, depression, anxiety, externalizing behaviors, sexualized behaviors, feelings of shame, and mistrust. TFCBT was rated one of the most well-supported effective practice, which is the highest score by the U.S. Department of Justice and the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare. TFCBT was also selected as a best practice for cases of child sexual abuse in the Coffin Best Practice Task Force final report. Another form of evidence-based intervention that has been used and effective in treating trauma in children is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. EMDR has become a powerful and successful new psychotherapy technique in helping people who suffer from trauma, anxiety, panic, disturbing memories, PTSD, and many other emotional problems. It is most effective and rapid. It is one of the most rapid and most effective method in treating PTSD currently. EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, right-left eye movement stimulation, which repeatedly activates the opposite side of the brain, releasing emotional experiences that are trapped in the nervous system. This allows the neurophysiological system, the basic of the mind and body connection, to free itself of blockages and reconnect itself. EMDR is most effective when used in conjunction with other traditional methods of therapy such as CBT. Zidler and Wagner recently conducted a research review comparing the efficacy of EMDR and trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy in the treatment of PTSD. Their results show that the superiority of one treatment over the other could not be demonstrated, suggesting that CBT and EMDR tend to be equally effective in the treatment of PTSD. Please see our annotated bibliography for additional evidence-based interventions.